is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. What if you want to be your own boss, but the whole founder thing isn't your cup of tea? What does it take to hit the ground running and take an already good business and make it great? How do you find the money, the resources, and the network to find and buy the right business for you? In this episode, Allegra Stennett, co-founder of New Majority Capital, tells you everything you need to know about the buy then build model of entrepreneurship. Listen to her great insights on why the purchase path is attractive to many new majority entrepreneurs, how you can build your chops to become an entrepreneur through acquisition, what it takes to find and buy a high potential business, and much more. Now, here's Allegra. Hey Allegra, welcome to Invisible Inc. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Shubha. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. So you've had a pretty interesting journey to where you are here today. So what brought you here? Tell us a little bit more about where you come from.
Sure. So from New York, I'm a native New Yorker. I'm the daughter of Jamaican immigrants, born and raised in New York City. Background is in finance. Grew up thinking I was going to go to law school. And after doing a banking internship at JP Morgan, realized I would rather be a banker than a lawyer. So I did that for 5 years in New York, Houston, and London. And throughout my journey there, particularly my last role, I was in healthcare banking and saw a lot of inefficiencies that made me question, could I make an impact in the US healthcare system? And then also doing so through digital health via entrepreneurship. So decided I wanted to go to grad school. So I applied, got in to do a master's in education policy at Harvard, and then did the MBA at MIT with a focus on entrepreneurship. And while at MIT, it was a friend of mine who called and told me I was in between startups. And she said, you'd be a good search fund CEO. And I'm like, what's that? I'm interested, but what is that? And connected me with one of my now co-founders. And we created New Majority Capital, which we'll discuss today. So that's a little bit about my winding journey from thinking I was going to be in law to finance to now impact investing.
I love it. In fact, you're one of the few people who I think I'll ever hear say that you preferred banking to anything else. But I'm a former banker myself, so I love banking too. So don't get me wrong. That was just interesting. So coming to New Majority Capital, what does the firm do?
Yeah, so New Majority Capital, we are an impact investing firm focused on providing training and capital to BIPOC and women entrepreneurs to help them acquire existing small businesses. And we do so with the mission in mind to address the gender and racial wealth gap in the United States. So that is what we do, provide training, and we also provide capital for individuals to acquire companies, to do M&A acquisitions, anywhere in the space of, say, 1 to 10 million annual revenue, companies of that size. And so we think it's a unique opportunity right now because we are undergoing this concept called the silver tsunami, wherein about 10 to 12 million baby boomer owned businesses will be up for sale the next 25 years. And so we desire to see some of that get into the hands of underrepresented entrepreneurs. Right now in the United States, over 84% of small businesses are owned by white males. And we want our entrepreneurs, these women, these people of color, to participate equitably in that population. So that is what we're about.
So I love the 84% number. I hadn't heard it before. So that's a new thing that I picked up. So I know that New Majority is pioneering this ETA or entrepreneurship through acquisition model. Just talk to us about what led the whole firm towards this ETA model versus just being a typical start from scratch funding vehicle.
So when we look at typical VC, the goal of a venture fund is to pretty much invest in a wide variety of startups with the assumption that one or two will hit it big. And that is great for the VC firm, but not so great for the 8 or 9 entrepreneurs that don't hit it big. What happens to them? Majority of venture-backed startups fail. So when you're looking at addressing the gender and racial wealth gap, you want to put entrepreneurs in a place where they're able to succeed. And so we know that if we had 10 underrepresented entrepreneurs and we funded a startup, the majority of those entrepreneurs are going to fail. Whereas in the ETA, which is entrepreneurship through acquisition, in the ETA model, the majority of entrepreneurs succeed. So that is not only great for investors, it's also great for these entrepreneurs. And so that is where we are telling our entrepreneurs, telling our stakeholders, it is better to buy and then build than to build from scratch. So in the ETA model, you're acquiring an existing company that has steady cash flows, the profitable company. These are not turnarounds. So it already has cash flow, it already has customers, a reputation, a team of employees, all things that startups do not have. It's easier for an entrepreneur to come in having some of the groundwork already done for them by the seller, the previous owner. And it's also appealing for investors that are investing in a cash flowing asset. Typically, VC investors, they're so used to, particularly if they're doing Series A, seed, pre-seed, they're investing into companies that haven't turned a dollar in profit. And so it's a win-win for all those stakeholders involved in this model.
Excellent. I'm sure we're going to dive into that in a moment. Before we go into that, if you're an entrepreneur, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I know I want to do something on my own. What are the markers of someone who's a good fit for the ETA model versus a start from scratch model? And are there those that are definitely not a good fit that you'd say stay away from and know from the beginning that this is not the right place for you?
Yeah, so I think in general, if you want to be an entrepreneur, then ETA model can work for you. If you don't have the desire to actually run a company, then this is not the role for you. So ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, or also known as search funds, this concept came out of Stanford in the 1980s, and it has historically been gatekept at institutions like Stanford and like top MBA programs. So the typical person who decides to go on this ETA path and become a searcher, as we call them, are MBA students, post MBAs that heard about ETA during their 2 years in business school and decided they want to actually buy a company instead of either going back into the corporate sector or finding a typical corporate job. And so that's like the typical profile. So it's a late 20s, early 30s individual with an MBA, it's a typical profile. We are challenging that model because the majority of successful small business in the United States are run by individuals who do not have MBAs. They have never graced the halls of Stanford and Harvard and all of that. And so we are challenging this notion that you need an MBA because we believe you don't need an MBA to run a small business. And that's where our accelerator comes in. We have an 8-week accelerator program that gives individuals the tools and the skills they need to not only assess is ETA right for them, but then also gain the understanding to get through the process to actually close on an acquisition and scale a company post-acquisition. And so that is our model. So we are attempting to change the notion of you need an MBA, you need to have gone to the fancy school in order to acquire and run a small business successfully.
So, what's the typical profile of a successful ETA route entrepreneur, especially when it comes to women and diverse women?
In terms of the industry or just the individual overall?
Just the individual overall, and also do you see tilts or slants in terms of industry when it comes to women?
So I say in terms of a successful searcher, it's someone who has a bit of tenacity. The traditional search fund model is this, where you graduate from business school and you raise a fund. You go out to investors, you raise, say, anywhere, say $400,000, and that is going to fund your search of a company for the next 2 years. Once you find a company that you like to acquire, you go back to those same pool of investors that have funded your search, and they have the first right of refusal to invest in your deal, into the actual company. In that model, the entrepreneur at some point is left with, say, about 30% of the company. And so we also don't necessarily believe you need 2 years to find a company. And so our model is a little bit different. But in terms of the entrepreneur, it needs to be someone who has tenacity, who has discipline, right? Because to do a search, you have to be very disciplined. You don't have a boss that's telling you, hey, did you find a company today? How many companies have you diligence? Did you send out that LOI? It's all on you, right? So you need to have a level of discipline, of tenacity, of understanding of the industry, right? Like some of these industries are highly technical, more technical than others. So if it's an industry that's technical, you need to have that expertise to go in and run it and be successful in it. So those are just a few characteristics that I think are important for individuals to have.
One question before we get into the process of how this works for an entrepreneur and also for a seller. What is your funding model? Because if you look at a VC, you're looking at institutional investors who are looking for a certain asset class with specific return expectations. How does that funding model work for new majority capital? And then what does that mean in terms of the types of businesses that you would pick, as well as how much follow on funding, if there is even a need for follow on funding, you do for the entrepreneurs that you support?
Yeah. So we're raising a fund right now. It's a $50 million fund. And with that fund, we're providing up to 100% of the capital necessary to acquire these businesses. So say, for example, it's a company that's doing 750,000 or a million in EBITDA. It's selling for 3x. It's selling for 3 million sales price. And so we would be providing the capital necessary. We do have some capital partners, including a major bank that has signed off on a partnership with us to provide 50% in debt financing for the deal, which would allow our fund to expand beyond the acquisitions where we'd have to put up the entirety of the sale price. How our model works, it's we have a revenue-based financing model, and then also an entrepreneur's equity in the company is growing over time. So it's a progressive equity model where within 5 years, an entrepreneur can gain 100% ownership of a company such that new majority capital is no longer on the cap table. And we're doing that because we desire it to be non-extractive. Our goal is not to have this traditional model where we own the majority of the company for perpetuity, right? We want these entrepreneurs to have generational wealth. We also want them to put themselves and their employees on a path of generational wealth. So that's our model, where the cash flows of the business would be paying back the acquisition with some return, obviously, for the fund.
Excellent. So now I want to jump to the juicy parts, which is, what does the process look like? How do you find the entrepreneurs, or how do they find you? And then what is the process that happens within the sausage grinder, so to speak, in terms of, let's first talk about maybe how you evaluate entrepreneurs and what you do in this 8-week accelerator program.
Sure. Yeah. So we have a pipeline right now of 80 entrepreneurs, and all of that has been inbound. And the inbound intake of entrepreneurs has shown us and been some level of validation to that for our model. So the majority of our entrepreneurs have come to us for help with due diligence and then also financing. And so they've come to us by word of mouth, hearing about us, or through seeing us at conferences. We've participated in the Harvard ETA conference. I went to the Booth conference. We'll be participating in the MIT conference, and Babson participating in their conference. So being on the conference circuit, also we have a presence on searchfunder.com, which is like the LinkedIn for search and for ETA. And so our entrepreneurs have heard about us through some of those channels. But our goal, obviously, as we scale and as we have 5 target cities with the foundation to run our programming in. And through that, we would be doing some on the ground recruiting in those specific cities, which are Atlanta, DC, Baltimore, Oakland, and Minneapolis. And so those would serve as our regional hubs for all of our programming nationally.
So I assume that you're going to get more applicants than you can accommodate at all of these places. So if there's a competitive aspect to it, or if there's a chance that somebody can't get in, what are the criteria you look for to make sure that somebody actually does get in?
Yeah. So we have a partnership with an organization that is helping us with the rubric and the criteria and the application process of getting into the accelerator. The things we're looking for is some of the same things that you would need to run a small business. So tenacity, discipline, grit, ability to overcome obstacles, an interest in running a small business, right? Because we don't want people to just sign up for an accelerator, but you actually have to put in the work once you're in the accelerator and being committed to your cohort. Our accelerator has a stipend at the end of it. So assuming you get through, you get a stipend. And then in the accelerator, we've partnered with Babson College to design the curriculum. There'd be some testing components, which one of our lending partners has said would rubber stamp our entrepreneurs and pre-approve them for financing, which is huge. So some of the things, just to talk about the accelerator a little bit, some of the things that they're learning is, what is ETA, right? You obviously don't need to know what ETA is to participate. What is ETA? What is the process? Why you? Do some self-reflection, and then going into, how do I do this? What is valuation? What is due diligence? Industry nuances, the difference between running a manufacturing company versus a service-based company versus a SaaS company, et cetera. How to establish broker relationships, negotiating a deal, scaling your company. So what are the tools you need to operate, to run the operations, to run marketing and sales? And then what does a successful exit look like? Once you've scaled the company to a level where you're interested in moving on and doing other things, how do you exit the company successfully? And so those are some of the things that we ensure that our entrepreneurs are aware of through the accelerator and gain tangible experience in during the accelerator.
I just love the broad-based nature of the curriculum. So while somebody's going through this accelerator, do they typically get to say, oh, okay, I think I looked at all these industries. I think I'm more of a tech person versus a manufacturing person? Or is that something that you're seeing that they develop an understanding and a preference as they go through the accelerator?
The goal of the accelerator is to help an entrepreneur develop their investment thesis, right? Like why a specific industry or why them in that industry? What are the tools and skills they need to be successful? Or what are they seeing in the marketplace that they think this is the right industry to fill a gap? So, yes, part of the accelerator is to help an entrepreneur come up with their investment thesis and an understanding and help them to pretty much craft how they're going to be searching. So you want to leave the accelerator knowing, hey, I'm looking for manufacturing companies. I want to look in this specific region of the country. And my rationale for doing so is X, or the reason I want to have this hold co structure is Y. Like, so that's the goal of the accelerator too, is to get entrepreneurs shored up and let them have a level of certainty and clarity as they go through their search.
So I come out of the accelerator, I have a pretty clear picture. I want to acquire a manufacturing company in the Midwest with X million dollars or whatever in revenue. What happens next? How do I go about finding the right candidate to purchase? And what is New Majority Capital's role in supporting that search process?
So one of the last portions of our accelerator is establishing broker relationships, right? And so I should mention this for the audience is that brokers are akin to real estate agents. So when you're looking to buy a house, employ a real estate agent whose job it is to find you a house that based on the specifications. You need 3 bedrooms, you need a backyard, etc. The same thing applies to a business. And there are brokers, they're called business brokers, that are actually also licensed to sell real estate because of the commercial real estate component of these businesses. And they are hired by the sellers to sell the business and get a commission, typically 10% of the sale price. And so it is a broker's job to then get the business ready for sale, the same way how a real estate agent would get the home ready for sale. You need to do some painting, you need to fix the fence. It's the business broker's job to get the business ready for sale in the same manner and present it to the market. And so as an entrepreneur, say I went through the accelerator, I want to buy this manufacturing company in the Midwest, I would then reach out to brokers in the Midwest and tell them, this is what I'm looking to do. Let me know what are the deals that you have available. And then say, for example, they show you 5, 10 deals, or you go through a few and you find one that you really think is the one. You would then, after doing some initial due diligence, getting what's called a SIM, a confidential information memorandum, which pretty much lists a variety of information about the business. How many employees, what's the finance look like, what's the history of the company, etc. Once you've done that, you would then submit an LOI, a letter of intent, which is pretty much gives you an exclusivity period to do further due diligence into the deal. And at that point, throughout the entire process, New Majority Capital is supporting you. So we have a pre-acquisition fund, which provides a 0% interest loan for entrepreneurs to cover some of the pre-acquisition costs, like quality of earnings, to hire a CPA to go through the company's financials to make sure what you see on paper is actually there in the bank. And through that process of due diligence, we have weekly office hours with our entrepreneurs, and we go through that process of due diligence, and they present companies to us, and we say, hey, you should think about that, or is that a red flag? Is that a green flag in terms of moving forward? We also have a partnership with Lawyers for Civil Rights that provides pro bono legal services to all of our entrepreneurs. And so that's also throughout the process, you will need legal counsel. And so that will help you get through the process there. And then obviously we provide the financing. So once you're ready to close on the deal, we would come in and help out with the financing. After you close on the deal, we have what's called the NMC Concierge, which is a suite of back office supports that every business needs: accounting, IT, marketing, HR, and a package deal, so to speak, for the entrepreneurs to help you scale the business and run it successfully after the acquisition.
I love the business model that you have at New Majority Capital. So one thing I want to ask you about is this whole process of deal making, the whole process of due diligence and making sure that you're getting a good deal for your money has been an area of potential blind spots, lack of knowledge, lack of exposure, because it requires access to insider networks, right? You know the lawyer, you know the good banker. Now, clearly, you guys are providing a lot of that support, but there's a part that the entrepreneur needs to bring to the table in terms of a street smartness, some kind of savvy, which they may not have just because they've not been exposed to that by virtue of being who they are or where they come from. How do you address that innate part, especially for women and diverse women, in terms of learning to become smarter negotiators or learning to spot a good deal from the bad, and all of those basic things that are so critical to making a good deal.
Right. And thank you for asking that. And that's those things are addressed in our accelerator, right? Like we have a section where we talk about negotiation and what does that look like, how to ensure that you're getting a fair deal. And part of that is having some data to arm you. So if you understand that multiples in this specific industry or companies are going for 6 times EBITDA, then you know, okay, I can't offer a deal where I'm offering a sales price that's 3 times. It's the seller's going to laugh at me. So you need to understand what the marketplace is. If this company, because of the size or because of some complexities internally, it's a company that should go for 3x, you shouldn't be offering 5x. And so these are some of the nuances that we teach in the accelerator. Understanding there's a real estate component. How does that change the deal? Those are some of the things that we want to make sure we arm our entrepreneurs, our fellows with information that then they can employ. And we have workshop case studies and scenarios through the accelerator to just give them some more practical experience as they go through.
Are you providing additional programming or some kind of support for women entrepreneurs? Because in my experience, this negotiation and financing part tends to be a sticking point. While I'm all in favor of like a co-ed or whatever model, I do think that there's a case to be made for a safe space where you can feel more comfortable getting familiar or getting confident with that negotiating aspect.
Yeah, so in our program, we don't separate out like women and have a component for that. But typically in office hours, it easily becomes therapy for our entrepreneurs, men and women alike. And so that's a safe space for them to come and I have entrepreneurs and women that'll ask me questions and they just want to speak to me and tell me what's going on with their search, etc. So we view that as like the safe space where they can come to us and ask any question. No question is a dumb question, ask us things that they would be afraid to ask investors. That's where we want to have that safe space. And then also in the accelerator, we designed it where it's partially in person because we want our entrepreneurs to build a community and be able to rely on each other and to see what's going on in each other's deals. How are they navigating some of the challenges? What are some questions that they had during due diligence and that they think would be beneficial for the group to know and be aware of, and whether it's like industry nuances or regional nuances, etc.
And based on all of the mentoring or office hours conversations you have had, particularly with women, are there 3 or 4 pointers, observations that just pop to mind when it comes to women entrepreneurs in particular?
I think it's interesting because I don't have this characteristic, thankfully, but I've noticed across the board, women tend to be more afraid to negotiate, and that does not help them, right? Like, we can't be afraid to negotiate because we're either leaving money on the table or leaving a good deal on the table because we are hesitant to do so. I think we need to inform ourselves and arm ourselves with data and then move forward confidently, whether it's in your skills and in your abilities, in your skills in terms of getting the deal done. So that's something I've definitely noticed over the last few years. And there's a lot of research that's done on that and women negotiating, particularly if you have a woman of color on one side negotiating against a white male owner on the other side, it may be daunting for them. But I'd say don't let the fear stop you from moving forward. And that's why we're here, right? To help you get through that process and to hopefully make you more of a confident negotiator and leader, right? Because the negotiation skills, it doesn't stop once you close the deal. You're going to have to be doing negotiations forever with customers, with employees, with local partners, the government. Like, this negotiation doesn't stop. So you might as well get comfortable with it. Particularly as a CEO, you're going to be the company's chief negotiation officer. So you need to be informed and develop a level of comfort around that.
Great. So, 2 questions. One, I have to ask you this. So, what makes you different? Like, what do you think is the cause of you not being daunted by negotiation? Maybe we can pick up a tip from you.
I don't know. Honestly, I think I've noticed, like, since I was a kid, I've always had an affinity to getting a deal. Whether it was like the smallest thing, like a shirt in a store, or like, did I have a coupon that I could use? Or I grew up watching my mom run a small business. She baked and sold cakes. And so I've witnessed, like, I've had a business savvy to some degree. And then I used to sell, like, we in elementary school, we'd have fundraisers and selling like those boxes of oranges every year, or things like that. And we'd sell cupcakes. And like almost every year, me and my mom, we would win. You'd get a prize for which kid and which family brought in the most money through that. It would almost always be. It's just because we had these little tactics, and it was just fun. It wasn't like, it was something light. The stakes were super low, but it was just fun. And so I grew up not being afraid to negotiate, because I think I'm deeply practical, and I just realized, okay, me negotiating equals XYZ and whatever success that is. And because I wanted that thing, I was willing to do, because for me, if the means was negotiation, that justified the ends of accomplishing whatever. And so for me, I just haven't been afraid. And then went to grad school, was a teaching assistant for the negotiation workshop at Harvard. Like it just, I don't know, it was kind of fun for me. When we finished the workshop, they asked us like, what's our dream job? And I told them, I'd love to negotiate like part-time for the government, like on an international scale. And my professor was like, well, you can do that. Why don't you do that? I'm like, I have no idea how to get started, but maybe in another life, I'll do that and fly around the world. And yeah.
And I know that's a great program. So, what are some of the mental flips or tricks or things that you've seen women do or that you've counseled women do to get over that hurdle, that fear of negotiation that have been effective?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because some of our women are in the thick of it right now. So it's TBD. It's to be determined if, how they'll come out on the other side. We assume, and I expect them to come out well. But I think like the first thing goes back to informing themselves and arming themselves with data. So if you understand, I think that kind of helps to frame it. So for example, and this is the same with salary negotiations. If you're making, I don't know, $60,000 now, and you're applying for this role, and you're like, I'd really like a bump in pay. You say, okay, I want a bump, and I'm going to ask for 80,000. But the actual job, the market rate of the job is 120,000. You asking for 80,000, you're selling yourself short by $40,000, literally 50% of the salary that you want, right? Getting that data, like, and visualizing it helps the individual, the woman, to see, oh, this is like a huge deal, and I really need to, because the market, that kind of protects you, right? You're not going in with just a random fact. You're saying data that's verifiable. That kind of helps in one. And then also it's role playing. Like I've role played with women before of how to ask for things and negotiation tactics. So I think that those two things, like arming yourself with data and then preparing for the negotiation, is one. That's something we would always talk about in the workshop. It's like, okay, before you go into a negotiation, you need to understand the facts, put yourself in the other person's shoes, and then how do you walk away from this with both people being happy at the end of the day. And that's the thing too, is like, this is something I learned in my younger days. It's like, you want to leave a negotiation with your counterpart being willing to negotiate with you in the future, right? That's a win, right? It's not only like, okay, you got this great deal, but the other person hates your guts. Like managing all of that. It's like a psychological thing in addition to just a financial thing.
Lovely tips. I like them all. So, coming back, hopefully, our entrepreneur has negotiated a great deal. She has a good business. What happens next? Do you have financial milestones or goals that she has to meet? What happens to the relationship after that? You mentioned the 5 year horizon where you want her to own it on her own behalf. But what happens during those 5 years? How does New Majority stay involved? And how does she ensure that she's being disciplined and productive in terms of how she's managing this business?
Yeah. So obviously the goal post acquisition is to successfully run the company and scale it as evidenced by growth in customers and revenue, et cetera. That's one thing. New Majority Capital would remain a partial owner up until the point where we've left the cap table, hopefully in 5 years. And so through that, we would have a voice in managing the company with them. And obviously, we're not doing the day to day. There are major decisions that come up. If there are questions, serve as advisors for these entrepreneurs to run the company, putting them in a position to succeed. We arm all of our entrepreneurs with mentors in that specific industry so they can have someone who's gone through this process, who's negotiated a specific government contract that can give them the expertise and the advice and also the network to put them in front of individuals they should. So that's some of the ways we stay in close proximity with our entrepreneurs, in addition to obviously the concierge and them leveraging the concierge for support as they scale.
Got it. And is there like some kind of a dashboard or scorecard, the investor report that you would provide if you're venture funded, for example, that you have standardized across your portfolio companies, or is it something that each entrepreneur develops on her own? How does that part work?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So one of the main KPIs obviously is growth in EBITDA, right? Because this is a search fund model, it's a cash flow dependent business. And so that is the main goal. It's like, are you growing EBITDA? And then obviously have governance around that such that, and that's like already, that would already been in the legal framework of how the deal was done. But to make sure that an entrepreneur doesn't like acquire a company with $1 million of EBITDA and then, run off with all of that, with all the cash flow. We make sure that that stays in place, that the company has reserves to grow, et cetera, and to invest in whatever, whether it's capital improvements or technology that would make the company further successful. So that's like the main criteria, is to see that EBITDA is growing.
And do you have typically board representation? Is that part of your operating model where, for example, if you get money from a venture capitalist, they negotiate board seats? How does that work within the context of your model?
Yeah, we would have representation in the company, but what's more important than even the board representation is that on day one, new majority capital, assuming we've put up the 100% capital for the acquisition, on day one, we own 100% of the company, right? So the CEO, the management team isn't allowed to just run off and do whatever they want to do. We would be owners of the company up until the entrepreneur reaches that point where they've bought out their equity, so to speak. And so that gives us an ability to make sure they have policies and procedures in place, have a governance structure of the company in place so that things don't run amok, for lack of a better word. So that's like the most important part of that.
And I assume that this would also involve some kind of milestones that they have to meet at. It's like an earnout, right? You accomplish these milestones in terms of EBITDA growth or whatever else the case may be, cash position, whatever the case might be. You hit them, you claw back whatever or you earn some X portion of the equity back, or you earn it for the first time, and then you keep meeting those successive goals and you increase your share of ownership. Is that pretty much how it works?
Yes, exactly. There's a vesting schedule for all the entrepreneurs, assuming certain milestones are hit, up until in 5 years. If it takes them longer, then that's fine, but that's like a target.
And just in terms of like the universe of companies that get acquired by your entrepreneurs, you mentioned that you have relationships with the brokers. Do you have a specific thesis, or do you even care? Are you industry agnostic, region agnostic? Do you have any thesis in front of any of those dimensions of what businesses get acquired?
Yeah, I mean, we have opinions of different companies based on our own experiences and frankly biases. However, we don't let that drive the entrepreneur's decision. So from the perspective of the fund, we're industry agnostic. With the exception of retail and restaurants, we don't really touch those too much for a variety of reasons. Besides that, we're industry agnostic, we're location agnostic, and our 80 entrepreneurs are all over the country. Our furthest entrepreneur is in Los Angeles, and then our closest entrepreneurs in our backyard here in Boston. And so we're all over. And then obviously with the regional hubs, we have a cohort of entrepreneurs. Our largest cohort is in Atlanta. And so, yeah, it's an entrepreneur's decision on where they want to acquire, and that may be driven by family reasons, personal reasons, want to go back to their hometown. And we don't see that. There are businesses for sale everywhere. So as long as you find the right deal, then that's great. And we think having some level of specificity is actually helpful. If you think about a woman, for example, we talked about women entrepreneurs. Like these are some of the conversations and the questions that I ask. We have a woman entrepreneur. It's like, okay, I want to acquire, say you want to acquire I don't know, a manufacturing company in, let's say in Chicago, but you're from Atlanta. And it's like, okay, this is not only an individual decision. Say you did your MBA at Kellogg, you want to move back to Chicago. It's like, okay, great. And then what does your life look like in the next 5 years? Like not only your professional life, your personal life. Okay, in the next 5 years, I just got married last year. I want to have a kid in the next 2, 3 years. Okay, and then is your partner working? Yep, my husband's working. Okay, so what does childcare look like? Well, childcare would probably be we want to be close to family. My husband's family is also from Atlanta. Okay, then why are you acquiring a company in Chicago, right? Unless you're going to fly in childcare every week. Like these are some of the decisions that we walk through. You're the CEO of this company. If this company is not relocatable, which some companies are, then you need to be living in close proximity to the company. And so that means you have to work your life such that it's able to be successful in this area wherever you acquire the company. So I think these are some of the decisions that it's not just an individual decision that becomes a whole family decision. We actually have searchers that are a husband and wife team that are acquiring a company together. So obviously they've had conversations, they're aligned on the same page of this is where we want to acquire, this is why, you're going to do this if we acquire, I'm going to do that. Like these are some of the things that even if your partner is not involved or even if you're single, you need to think about what does my life for the next 5, 10 years look like, because you're going to be running this company for at least 5. What is framing your life to fit that?
So assume that I'm an entrepreneur. I know I want to do something on my own, but I'm not sure whether the buyer, let's say I want to go down the ETA route. What are the 4 or 5 things that you'd suggest I do just starting out to give myself the best shot I can at becoming a successful entrepreneur through acquisition?
I'd say if you're starting out, just books you can read, like Buy Then Build or HBR Guide to Buying a Small Business, just to have an understanding of the industry, right? Of what this is. And then start to just look around. You can just poke around Biz Buy Sell, Axial, all these different platforms. Kind of like if you were buying a house, you maybe even before you find a real estate agent, you'd look at Zillow and Truly just to see what's out there, what's available, where, it'll help you. It'll bring some sanity and bring you back down to earth. If you're thinking, hey, I can get a 5-bedroom house or 5-bedroom house for 300,000, it'll bring you back to reality when you see the prices. Same thing with businesses. So look and see what's in the marketplace in the areas that you can search. You can filter by cash flow. You can filter by location, just so you see what's available, and then that'll help you in framing and determining, hey, this is what I want to do. And then obviously apply to our accelerator and come do the accelerator and learn some of the tangible skills to go through the process. So, and there's a lot of information, free information online. Attend conferences. I think is super helpful because you meet people that are in the space. You form connections, you form a network that you can then lean on. And I'd recommend individuals who are just new to this to have a search funder presence. So to get a profile on searchfunder.com, it's free. This is a community of exclusively of individuals that are buying and selling companies. And so I think that's very helpful.
Are you aware of, or is it helpful to have communities of other women who are also on the same path to give you a little extra bump in terms of whether it's confidence or exchanging tips? Or are you aware of any of such communities?
Yeah, I think it is helpful to have. There have been like women only events or location specific events on Search Funder. I know there was like a New York event and so forth. So they go around the country doing these sorts of different events. I think that's definitely helpful. And when you meet women in the space, ask them what communities are they connected to, or what are some of the challenges they've had to overcome, or know anyone who's doing deals in this industry, or hey, is there a bank they would recommend for the SBA loan if they're going that route? So I think definitely building those networks are important because particularly for women, the search fund space is majority white male. So as a woman, you're going to stand out. If you're a woman of color, you're standing out even more. So it's definitely important for you to have a network and for you to meet people across all demographics that are in the space.
So let's say that I do all of these things, but I come, let's say, from either none of my parents had a business. Let's say I just had a regular job, or maybe I did, maybe I didn't, maybe I was a homemaker. Are there things I should be doing? Like, would you recommend that I take a job for a couple of years, work for a business of whatever size? What are some of the things I can do before I take this big step that can help me better prepare for being a CEO?
Yeah, I don't think necessarily you need to take a job unless there's some financial and or skills reason to do so. I think if you have the time, it would be beneficial to just have informational interviews with small business CEOs. But if you have time on your hands, go and talk to individuals that are running companies, whether it's a local company, like your local HVAC company, your local manufacturing company. Ask the CEO, what does their life look like? Challenges. How many hours are they spending in the business? What the most difficult negotiation they ever had? What are their plans? How do they build strategic plans for the next 3 to 5 years? Like you can just go around and ask CEOs questions and what are some things they wish they knew before they bought this company or started this company, whatever the case may be. Get that information because that's going to like each one of those informational interviews will give you points of things of, hey, I need to learn that, or I really need to make sure I have this down before I start. So that may be helpful.
Excellent. And personally, for you, just before we conclude, what keeps you the most excited and involved in the work that you're doing? Are there moments that kind of pop in your mind that say, this is why I'm doing this work, or this is what makes it worth everything?
Yeah, I had a moment like that. So I went to the US Black Chambers conference in a few months ago. And I met a woman there who she runs like an event business. So they do like, I don't know if you've seen like these paint and sips events in different areas. So where a group of individuals will go and they'll paint a painting and sip wine or something like that. So she runs these different events and it's very popular around the country. There's lots of different mom and pop owners of these sorts of companies. And she was having a big challenge with finding space because she didn't have her own space. And I told her, I was like, well, you're having this challenge finding space. Why don't you buy an event space company? Right? Because then you have the space you own the space to run your events out of. And you don't got to run your events. You can also just rent out the space for weddings, for corporate events, etc. And she literally was almost burst into tears when I was telling her this is possible. Like, you can do this, find an event space company. NMC would provide the capital because you're already running your small business. You already have a track record of being a successful business owner. You're just coming upon this challenge and here's a solution that you could go for. So I think that those are the moments where like seeing this lady like start to like tear up is like, those are the moments where I'm just like, I'm glad I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
Fantastic. So is there any question that I should have asked you about this whole topic or about yourself that I didn't?
About us? Well, I'd say this. If there are people watching that you really want to be involved, you're interested in our mission, you like what we do, but you don't want to own a company, you're more than willing to invest in New Majority Capital. We're raising our smallest check size on the management company side. We're raising on WeFunder. So our smallest check size is $200 and our largest check size is over $200,000. That's not for the fund, that's for our crowdfunding campaign. And so you can be involved by investing and be an investor and following us along. If you want to donate, we also have our nonprofit is grant seeking. So you can donate to our nonprofit, and that allows us to run our programs in the community to get more individuals into this ETA space. So we welcome you to be a part. You can find us on all the different social media platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. at New Majority Capital. We'd love to, have you on board. So yeah, that's what I'd say there.
Thank you so much, Allegra. This has been a very informative conversation, certainly for me, and I know for many other women who may not have considered this option. And a whole new avenue now opens up to freedom, more flexibility, and control over their own economic lives. So thank you very much for the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So that was an eye-opening conversation with so many nuggets on buying your way into entrepreneurship. Here were the 10 that resonated the most with me. 1, if being a founder is not your cup of tea, you're no less an entrepreneur if you decide to take a different route to running a great business. 2, to increase your odds of success, you need to play a game where there's more than one real winner. Venture-funded businesses aren't in that game. 3, grit covers a lot of shortcomings. If you have grit, you're already way ahead in the game. Don't shortchange yourself. 4, it always pays to get your investor hat on. How can you learn to think of the business like an investor would? 5, you only need high school maths to master the basics of business fundamentals. How much can you make each year? How steadily can you make it? And how long do you need to own it? 6, once again, we find that access is everything. So if you want to speed up your progress, find and tap into others like you who are also in the same game. 7, research is your secret superpower, but you'll get even more from it if you also research things that feel strange and uncomfortable, like acquisition multiples and the business buying and selling market. 8, industry matters, not just for what widgets you'll end up making, but also about what life you'll live and how much money you'll make. Choose thoughtfully. 9, you're known by the company you keep. Pay close attention to the quality and fit of the legal and financial professionals who will help you buy your business. Last but not least, negotiation is the queen of all skills. Practice and prepare, but never abdicate your control of negotiating for what you're worth. So, is buying a business a path that's right for you? Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achieve.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.